Good morning, I'm Stacy Kalberman. I'm the ethics officer here in DeKalb County if you haven't met me through one of my ethics classes yet. Over a year ago, we asked all DeKalb employees to participate in a survey that reviewed the ethical culture here in DeKalb County. At the time we started the survey, we told you two things. First, we were conducting the survey as a type of benchmark to get a better understanding of the ethical climate in the DeKalb workplace. Our expectation was always to retake the survey in 3 or 4 years to see if we found improvement after the ethics office had been in place for several years and after new DeKalb leadership had been in place for several years. Second, we told you we would report the results of the survey to all employees shortly after the survey was closed and analyzed. Unfortunately, the ethics office was not able to provide employees the survey results in the way we had hoped, which was by personally meeting with all of you in groups. Because of this, we are reaching out to everyone by video. Our intent with the Ethical Culture Survey was never to call anyone out individually or any group out individually for unethical behavior or to start an investigation on information given to us in the course of the survey. It was simply to gain feedback from the employees on leadership and ethics in DeKalb and to analyze that information to find areas of improvement. We all want to work in a place that values ethical conduct and where all employees are treated fairly and subject to the same set of rules. I'm going to introduce you to Perry Tomlinson, whose organization, the BB&T Center for Ethics at the University of North Georgia, will be explaining the results of the survey. As always, if you have any questions or wish to discuss the results of the survey with the Ethics Office, please feel free to call us or get in touch with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. At the BB&T Center for Ethical Leadership, our primary focus is to help organizations develop their ethical culture. And as you can see here, the focus of that is built around the relationship of values, leadership, and employee engagement. And as a part of that work in the center, we developed a solution called the Ethical Culture Indicator. And this particular survey is intended to provide insight on employee engagement, which has a direct correlation to the ethical culture. As you can see, this was developed by my partner, Dr. Brian Dawson, who is an industrial psychologist at the University of North Georgia, and as you can see from his experience, has done a lot of surveys, polls around leadership, and has provided some insight to some major companies. For myself, I come from an organization that has a significant focus on leadership, and I bring kind of the practical end of what one does with the survey. And for the most part, now that you have that information, what it is that you intend to make different in your leadership process. This is an image that Gallup has created about what makes, a highly engaged employee. And as you look at these, you see these two ladies here, you might look at this and say, well, the lady on the right's probably not a good employee, and the lady on the left would be a great employee. The way to look at this is to presume that both these ladies have kind of equal ability, skill, whatever. They both had the opportunity to really be highly engaged, but the difference between the two is how their managers interact and interface with them. So as you begin to look at these are called the 12 drivers of employee engagement, you can see that they have to do with how the manager interacts with the employee. For example, it says someone has talked about their progress. Engagement improves performance and commitment. It helps with your teams. It makes sure that your customers are satisfied. It reduces turnover because people finally feel that somebody cares about what they do and what they contribute in the county, and can even become something that can be used in recruiting talent. So as you look at this little presentation I made earlier, it's important to understand why the Ethics Office is focused on this issue of employee engagement, okay? And as you look at this, you can see that studies have indicated that a high employee engagement level can equal a much more ethical culture. And I can tell you from working with a lot of ethics and compliance people, they recognize there are things one has to do in terms of having hotline reporting or internal audit checking different things and building a sense of employees recognizing their controls to help drive ethical behavior. But if the climate, if the culture leans in an ethical way, then it creates an environment that is much easier to manage. And quite frankly, the responsibility isn't just on ethics for that ethical culture. It becomes every leader and manager's responsibility. This gives you a little background of how long we've been working on the ethical culture indicator with DeKalb County. As you can see, we began back in August of 2016. As has been pointed out, this survey period was from March 1st of 2017 through the 27th. We have presented this survey to all levels of leadership, as well as the county commissioners and the DeKalb County Ethics Board. And as you can see, since that time, we have been providing some insight into the survey to managers. And as you can see, the release of this video is essentially our next step. So as a reminder, the Ethical Culture Indicator is an online survey based on 88 statements and 4 subjective questions. This was completely anonymous and confidential. A lot of effort went in to be sure that the employees felt that they could be open and honest with their feedback without any concern that someone would be able to identify them from the way that they responded. As you look at this chart, you can see that the first dimension that is shown in the areas for improvement is what we will call leadership confidence. And you look at the number and you see that 2.75 is the number that was assigned to that. Your point would be out of what? Well, let me remind you that in the survey, you were giving the option to indicate strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. And each one of those was given a value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as a result, if you look at this with a 2.75, that the average of responses literally was down in the strongly disagree, the disagree, and neutral. It doesn't mean there weren't some very positive, but just the averages of that is what drove that number to 2.75. So the next levels, future vision, you can see that at 2.78. And future vision would indicate this is really a way that leadership has communicated the ultimate objectives and mission of the county, and it would suggest there may be a little disconnect in how that future vision is communicated. The next one is values. This is an area in the survey that Dr. Dawson and I put a lot of attention to, and it's just simply to say that the employees of DeKalb County seemed very confused about what the stated values were of the county and really had any kind of insight into what those values were, what the acceptable behaviors would be for those values. And the real question was the entire county employee group living up to those values. And values, as you saw in the earlier chart, are very critical to the culture that you want to create, particularly the ethical culture, in terms of being able to gauge how leaders and all employees respond to those values. So again, a very important element. Communication is the next one. You can see that score at 3.01. And essentially the lowest one statement in the DeKalb County survey was there is open and honest two-way communication in DeKalb County. So I'll show you that in a little bit further as we go along. But communication in terms of working with managers and leaders, as well as information being communicated, was something that really stood out in the survey. The last one in this category, feedback recognition, just simply says that the employees of DeKalb County did not feel that their contribution, their efforts, their performance was getting any kind of recognition. And the feedback element would indicate that whether it's plus or minus feedback, there was not enough feedback that was being provided to employees, nor was there a comfort level of how feedback might work its way up or to the center of the organization. So a lot of areas of opportunity, if you will, in those categories. If you look at the areas to sustain, these are very simply the categories that really resonated the highest relative to all of the scores with the employees of DeKalb County. And I will tell you, work balance being one of the highest at 3.77 is a really good number, because what it indicates that the employees who work at DeKalb County feel like there is a balance in being an employee and really being able to live their life. So it's not like they feel like the county takes over their life. They give their part, but the county also respects them and their ability to have a full life. The next two categories were very inspiring to the leadership as we reviewed these, because as you can see, the immediate manager response and the immediate manager ethics were number 2 and number 3 in the highest categories in the survey. It indicated that there seemed to be a trust element between employees and their immediate manager, but it would also suggest there is a perception that that connection, whether you do it up the line or into the internal circle, was maybe where the disconnect was. So the feeling was, if we began to do something that would affect the way that management interacts, at least the employees seem to have a high regard for their immediate manager. I can tell you, when awareness of ethical standards came up at the top of the list, the ethics office was really glad to see that. And I would indicate, just from the review we did and the discussion that came back, that the creation of the ethics office is really what drove that particular response, because I know that Stacy and her team have spent a lot of effort in making sure and communication with folks about what the ethical standards and policies and procedures would be. And then finally, you can see the area of training, which essentially says there is a perception that the training that folks receive around the ethics area is clearly on an improvement. In many cases, they're seeing training that they had never seen before. So as you look at this next slide shows you every dimension. We picked out the ones that were effectively the highest and the lowest, but this shows you every category. And as you see these colors, the dark red, as you can see on the right, is strongly disagree, and then all the way over to the dark green, which is strongly agree. If you just look at it visually, you can see that the immediate manager had the most green. So you can visually see how that particular category was one of the higher ranked of those. But then you can also see the dark red in the future vision and the leadership confidence. One of the things that was pointed out is the neutral area where you got to be careful of saying, well, those are people that aren't here, aren't there. It may be the greatest opportunity to influence those folks in the yellow area or the neutral area to a stronger sense of agreement with some of these dimension categories. So just a quick visual there. This next kind of green, red, yellow chart shows you the dimensions that were used in the ethics element of this. And you can see that the values, I mentioned that before, they are the ones that go the furthest on the red, but then you can see the awareness and it looks like reporting of ethics, which is another good element for the ethics office, feeling like there is more clarity around how to report those. Shows up very well in this particular graph. I want to talk for a few minutes about the subjective statements and just remind you that we had probably of that 1,251, somewhere around 800 people that provided responses to the statements that you're going to see in the next few slides. And what we conveyed to the leadership when we put this together is that we would not be providing the actual statements that were completed on the survey because we felt like that would encroach on the anonymity and confidentiality. But what we would do, as we analyzed all of the statements, is put them in themes so that we could still communicate what the employees were trying to say without necessarily having to run the risk of somebody's identity being compromised by sharing their particular response. So as you look at this, this first question, in what areas has the DeKalb County government excelled as it relates to honest and ethical business practices? If you see that 24% next to it has not excelled, just to kind of give you some feedback about this from a fair way, 24% of the responses when asked this question, maybe because they weren't sure if they were going to have another opportunity to give constructive feedback, just simply said it had not excelled. And I know that was a little concerning to leadership, but at the same time, it was probably just a way that people responded when they felt like maybe this statement was asking for an undeserved pat on the back, but it clearly took a preponderance of the responses in that first question. But if you begin to look at the rest of these, the customer priority, I know that when we covered this with the leadership team, it really connected with their message about how important the customer, the citizens of DeKalb County are to the county government. It got the highest score. You can see that a lot of folks felt very comfortable about their training. And then the next few are really about the ethical environment, the communication of ethical standards, the improving of ethics. They believe there was some improvement there, and the fact that there was some dealing with corruption. So as you look at this, the answers are given to you in terms of the weight. This next question is where folks were given the opportunity to make suggestions of how to improve. And as you look down this list, this is a pretty good indication of opportunities for leadership to really work to develop this, looking at transparency. There was a lot of responses that indicated that there should be more transparency in things that are going on, things that are being addressed by different layers of leadership, and quite frankly, just letting people know what is going on before they see something in the paper. A lot of folks commented on that. You can see training, honesty, accountability, communication. All of these were things that the employees suggested would be things that could really make a difference in how the county operates ethically. This was probably my favorite question. In what areas is there opportunity for growth and improvement? And as you look at this list, a couple of them were from the previous question, but the overriding response and what we shared with the leadership when we presented the survey results, there is a real question mark about the level of management interaction and involvement with employees. As you look at this list, just the broad term of management would indicate that. Communication, which is clearly in the responsibility of leadership and management. There were some specific department issues, and again, in the feedback where folks may have indicated about some particular concerns that may have existed within departments. As Stacy said, none of that data was in any way used to kind of create any challenges there. It was just a way for the leadership to have a sense of the pulse of some of these departments. In many cases, these departments, when folks were giving feedback, were giving positive feedback about the level of their managers. But as you look at this to me is one of the things that really, as leadership looks at this survey, what may need to change here is the way that leaders and managers interact with their employees. The final question was just asking the employees about the top 3 values. And as you look through that, as you see in most organizations, you see honesty, integrity, and respect. And I think the leadership team has looked at those values as a way of deciding how they may shape their values so that they can be used effectively within the organization. I'll have to tell you, when we were presenting these results to Michael Thurman, we had some information about this employee engagement level. And as you'll recall, I had that on the red, green, yellows. It was the final category there, that we were able to calculate. As you see on this chart, this is some information that Gallup provides on their survey. Gallup is very big in the polling and in surveying and really having an understanding of what causes people to act in the way they do and different sources of data. But as you look at the engaged, I'll pick on that one category, in Gallup's study across all industries and different types, universities, county governments, corporate, retail, whatever it may be, their averages come to 30%. So when we were doing this calculation, we determined that the engagement level for DeKalb County is 26%. Now, I can tell you that's not many digits away, but when you start talking about percentages, there's a pretty wide gap of opportunity that could come from focusing on increasing your engagement. We also had the opportunity to see in that data, there was a report that came out on state, county, municipal government employees in this area of engagement. And as you can see, the state of Georgia came in at 34%. So as you look at this next report that I have in front of you, these are the prescriptions that Dr. Dawson and I prepared for the county. And as I mentioned earlier, you can see that first one is there is open, honest, two-way communication with the county. That particular statement received one of the lowest scores. And as you look through the others that are listed here, I'll bounce through those so you can begin to see them. One of the things we realized is that although some of those were things that could be done to improve, there were also some categories of statements that received a fairly positive response compared to the level of responses that the county needed to focus on maintaining. So these prescriptions went really from the things that need to be done to the things that you need to maintain. But one of the things we did when we looked at the prescriptions is we then categorized the prescriptions of what might be some changes that leadership should consider into three categories. The blue that you see there indicates that that particular statement really focuses on the county's values and, quite frankly, maybe the lack, not so much of the values, but of employees understanding what the values are and how they can describe what their behaviors should be. So you see a couple examples there. The next thing you see are the red areas of trust. And what we were suggesting there is that the employees' responses indicated there was a little disconnect in terms of trust with the leadership at the county. Now, I will tell you, trust can't be typically fixed by words. The primary fix for trust are actions. And in terms of changing somebody's trust barometer, if you will, it takes time. If someone has achieved that level of mistrust, then you're going to need to really focus on activities, not words, activities that really begin that trust, and people need to see that over a sustained way before it really begins to resonate. The last one that you see is in yellow is the coaching model. And that would suggest, and I think I've got some here on this other slide too, that these particular statements could really be influenced by a model that changes the interaction between managers, supervisors, and their employees. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. The other thing is the coaching model has the best opportunity to really change the employee engagement numbers. I'm going to briefly show you the coaching culture that we are delivering right now through the Ethics Office to improve employee engagement, quite frankly, following Michael Thurman's direction. As you look at this, you can see the director, manager, employee, and there may be different layers, but the first thing you do in a coaching culture is to identify these supervisors and managers as coaches. It's like a new term and typically how they are presented in this particular model. Employee engagement's important to us, and what we would suggest that before we actually put the coaching culture into practice, the employee engagement, and this is just kind of a reflective way, is sitting at about this 25% level. But once the coaching session between the manager-employee takes place, and you see that honest and open feedback, when we go through the training and the workshop about the form and how you use it, it is clearly about that honest and open feedback that every employee wants to hear, and that the manager provides the opportunity for similar feedback. But it is focused on performance. I will tell you in closing that you can see here the list of the departments that have essentially volunteered to participate in the coaching culture, and what we're hoping for is an opportunity to reach out to many other departments and give them the opportunity to, one, have an impact on employee engagement and really change the way that messaging occurs with their employees.